Joseph Stalin, Joe Stalin, the man of steel. He takes over after Lenin dies. Last lesson we ended with Lenin's death. So about Stalin, well, he's from Georgia. Georgia had been conquered by the Romanovs, Tsar Alexander II, before Stalin's birth. It was a new territory associated with Russia. Georgia was a non-Russian territory in which many young people, including Stalin, would study the works of Marx and Lenin and other revolutionary authors. Stalin, he was expelled from seminary school. He tried to be a priest, and they kicked him out for failing to appear for his final exam. Stalin asserted that he had been expelled for possessing Marxist propaganda. He adopted the name Stalin, meaning man of steel in English. Stalin means man of steel, as a revolutionary pseudonym, an adopted name. As General Secretary of the Communist Party, Stalin gave key government offices to his supporters. So when the time came, he had a whole lot of supporters backing him. Lenin soon became aware of the fact that Stalin was using political office to advance his own power instead of advancing the interests of Russia or the Communist Party. In 1923, right before Lenin died, Lenin proposed Stalin's removal from the position of General Secretary. But the continued decline of his health, Lenin's health, prevented him from carrying this out. So Lenin didn't want Stalin to ever be the one to succeed him. He wanted Stalin out. He thought Stalin was bad news. After Lenin's death, a power struggle developed between Trotsky, remember he led the Red Army in the revolution, and Stalin, the general secretary of the party, who had all his supporters that he put in. With the aid of other powerful communists, Stalin forced Trotsky out of the party and then into exile. He was murdered in Mexico. Trotsky got murdered by Stalinist agents in 1940. If you read Animal Farm, Snowball is Trotsky, and Napoleon, the totalitarian pig, is Stalin. All right, Stalin wrote Marxism and the National Question, which offered a thoughtful consideration of the problems of creating a unified socialist state despite the presence of dozens of competing nationalities. Remember how diverse Russia is. This brought him to the attention of Lenin. But despite the merits of his work, Stalin is not known for his intellect or his philosophy. Stalin advanced from one political position to the next until he achieved total control over the Communist Party, and therefore the Soviet Union as well. Totalitarian societies fall under the total control of a single political party, or sometimes an individual, and state apparatus. They are often created through the leadership of a charismatic individual like Lenin, Stalin, and the development of a cult of personality around that person, the dictator. This was created around Joseph Stalin, a cult of personality. He became the party. However, if the controlling political party can maintain a functioning economy and an effective apparatus for social control, a totalitarian society can also persist despite leadership by individuals who lack dynamic or exciting personalities. So a society doesn't need a cult of personality to be totalitarian. It just happens Soviet Union was. Totalitarian societies become unified through complex belief systems called ideologies. For the Soviet Union, it was communism. For the United States, it's democracy. That's our ideology. Totalitarian societies become unified through these belief systems. And they permeate into daily life through work, school, sports, art, and more. 20th century phenomenon, totalitarian societies rely on mass media. Never was the case before, but in the late 1900s, everyone has radios and they get TVs, and now they're going to use these forms of media to spread their propaganda over the radio and the newspaper and the television. And they're going to create a cult of personality around the leader and to communicate with people about the state ideology. It's like brainwashing. You hear it, see it all day, every day, and everything you do. Totalitarian governments suppress dissent through networks of informants. They're going to rat you out if you do something wrong, so you don't do something wrong. These are the informants. They rat you out. Persecution by the police and the military, long prison terms for minor little crimes or trumped up crimes against the state, and even assassination. It's a very strict society, totalitarian societies. Use the military and the police and informants and mass media to try to control the people. Karl Marx envisioned a revolution of the international working class that would lead to the emergence of a communal ownership of the means of production and fully developed communist society. He did not envision the transition to communism led by a revolutionary party. It was supposed to be the people rising up, not a political party overthrowing the government. Marx did not envision party control of society and the state. But that's what we have in the Soviet Union. Lenin's NEP, the new economic policy that we talked about last lesson, actually seemed to represent a step backward from the path of communism. Remember, this was Lenin's idea to save the economy, to allow farmers to have private business, to sell things for profit, to stabilize Russia after the war. This was capitalism in a communist society. It was not what Marx wanted. Thus, Stalin's aggressive direction of Soviet society and economy, as well as his vision of achieving socialism in one country by itself, represented a radical departure from Marxist theory. Remember, Marx wants the world, to all the workers in the world united. Stalin just wants Russia. He only cares about the Soviet Union and achieving communism there. Millions of Soviet peasants were deeply attached to their own farms, and understandably, right? It's where you live, it's your home, it's yours. It's hard to give that up. They have autonomy, and independence as farmers. The wealthier farmers are called kulaks. They're fiercely resisted collectivization, resorting to sabotaging the communists or other of their own property and livestock to slow the process. They're resisting. In some cases, half or more of key livestock, like horses, sheep, cows, were slaughtered by the farmers themselves, who preferred to see the animals die rather than fall into the hands of the communists. Millions of peasants were forced into starvation, imprisoned, exiled, murdered for resisting collectivization. The years 1929 to 31 showed the most significant growth here. In 29, 57 collective farms totaled 4.2 million hectares. In 1930, 86 farms totaled 38.1 hectares, while by 1931, there was 211 farms that totaled 79 million hectares. That's a lot of land and a lot of collective farms. So, what are the advantages and disadvantages of collectivization, of taking someone's private farms and putting them all together and making a public farm? Well, an advantage would be when the farmers pool the land and their tools and their work, their labor, they should in theory be able to work more efficiently. The disadvantage, or a disadvantage, could be when the farmers lose their private property, their autonomy, their individualism, and their individual profit. Well, they lose the motivation to work. What's in it for me? They're not going to work harder for someone else than they would have for themselves. Well, the official Soviet texts, including articles from Soviet newspapers, represented a one-sided point of view. There was no debate, really, in their media. It was all the party message. They could never be read as news. Rather, they functioned solely as propaganda. This text offers a good example of propagandist praise for the collectivization program. Note how no alternative view is presented, and that the article claims unequivocal success. It wasn't true. People suffered. But that's not what you would have read. Kulaks, or the rich peasants, were among those who most fiercely resisted Soviet collectivization. This document describes measures taken against those kulaks. What impact might these measures have had on affected villages? Well, they would have been cut off from normal economic activity and possibly forced into bankruptcy and starvation. The foreign and hostile elements were who were purged may have been arrested, imprisoned, exiled, or murdered. That's what a purge is. They get rid of you one way or another. And that's what they did to the kulaks. Oh, poor Ukraine. This is an example of genocide. Stalin did a communist genocide of Ukrainians, using his communism as an excuse for mass murder and starvation. The government justified the mass arrests of Ukrainian cultural leaders and scientists in 1929 by accusing the detainees of plotting a revolt. Soviet military power enabled the repression. It was literally the military coming and taking away their food and allowing them to starve. The government stripped the kulaks of all their possessions and shipped them to remote Siberian camps, middle of nowhere, very harsh environment, freezing. The borders were closed to prevent food from being imported, leaving the Ukrainians to starve. It's like if they took everything out of your home and then locked the doors and didn't let anyone in or out, you would die. Officially, the Soviet Union denied the existence of a famine and used staged tours and other forms of propaganda to persuade the rest of the world that, yeah, it's all fine here, when in actuality they're exterminating the population of Ukraine. In 1933, the United States formally recognized the Soviet Union and Stalin's government as legitimate Russian government. In spring 1933, up to 25,000 Ukrainians died every single day. 25,000 Ukrainian deaths a day. This is a genocide. They were targeted for mass extermination by Stalin and his communism. In the end, up to 1 out of 4 Ukrainians died due to imprisonment, execution, or starvation. This is known as the Holodomor, the Ukrainian genocide. All right, why might agricultural productivity have been highest on small plots of land farmed, where small plots of land farmers were permitted to cultivate for themselves? Well, farmers had control over the land and the agriculture they produced. They could sell or exchange the products as they wished. They had higher levels of motivation to farm. There was an incentive. They got to work for themselves. They profited personally from it, and they worked harder because of it. So private plots accounted for only 4% of the farmland in Russia, but they produced over a third of all the fruit, milk, meat, eggs, and other non-grain agricultural products. Capitalism works. Can't really get away from it. Communism it was just not working. They needed to allow certain private farms. Stalin's first 5-year plan had an extraordinary level of success for the USSR, just like it had in China for Mao, but the costs were very high. The basic needs of civilians were neglected, and the system of forced labor camps developed in this period profoundly violated the basic civil and human rights of individuals imprisoned in them. Basically, slave labor. They enslaved their own people to industrialize, and while this happened, people suffered greatly. So, if we look at this graph, in what areas did the greatest increase in production occur? And you can see this is oil and coal. Oil and coal are used for industries. um, to make steel and other products like that. Oil and coal are the backbone of an industrial society. That is what Stalin was trying to create, and that is what he focused on developing. Why were these industries important? Well, they provide energy, your electricity, and you need the energy to power all the industries in the country. Very important. So that's why he focused on these. Women had their social role changed quite a bit under communism. You see, communist societies around the world have pushed hard to bring women into full employment in the workforce as equals. And communism wants everyone the same, even women. In order to do so, these societies found it necessary to collectivize work normally undertaken by women as unpaid labor, like cooking, cleaning, childcare, elder care. While women were granted education and training that enabled them to enter traditional male dominated fields like heavy work and in the industry and the factories, women could now work there. But women continued to dominate traditional female sectors under communism, such as education, childcare, healthcare, and the service industries. So, in theory, they're now equal, but as it played out, they weren't doing so much different than before. So here's a woman driving a tractor. She's driving over domestic items such as cooking pots and dishes. Well, the message is that women will take on new roles in the Soviet Union, displacing their old responsibilities. Institutions refers to education, healthcare, government, and administration. So, in which areas did women make the greatest gain in employment? Well, if we take a look here, we see the women making their greatest gains. It's construction. The percent of women nearly tripled. In what area did the women have the highest percentage of employment overall? Not the highest growth, but the highest employment was the institutions. Remember, institutions are like schools, healthcare, hospitals, the government, things like that. So this image shows women at work in heavy industry buildings building tractors. World War II interrupted the Soviet Union's 5-year economic plans, as shown by the gap between the third and the fourth plans. The Soviet government continued to implement 5-year plans even after 1955. They had a lot of them. It was their thing. As a whole, the Soviet economy remained driven by central planning commissions and the Communist Party until the mid 1980s when Mikhail Gorbachev, the last leader of the Soviet Union, implemented policies of perestroika. So he ended some of the strict control the government had. The painting in this slide is titled Black Ravens, and it depicts the police vehicles that were used in making arrests. The arrival of the Black Ravens at anyone's home could mean death for the occupants. It was by a Polish man in 1930, this painting. The secret police. They don't need a warrant. They'll come and get you. This is what totalitarian societies do. So, the early purges included court hearings that resulted in the dismissal of party members. Later purges included trials, convictions, and summary executions. Millions got arrested and tortured until they made false confessions. Then they were executed. By 1930, close to 760,000 individuals had been sentenced to forced labor in Soviet camps. By 1941, 8 million prisoners worked at forced labor camps. This is a large part of the population. 8 million people forced to go into labor camps. And you bet most of them were probably innocent. All right. In the Soviet Union, as in other communist societies, school books represented the official or state point of view. According to this text, why did the purges occur? Well, let's read this. The defeated exploiting classes began to revenge themselves on the party and the people for their own failure, for their own bankruptcy. They began to resort to foul play and sabotage against the cause of the workers and collective farmers, to blow up pits, set fire to factories, and commit acts of wrecking in collective and state farms, with the object of undoing the achievements of the workers and collective farmers and invoking popular discontent against the Soviet government. Well, this text blames the victims, accusing them of acts of sabotage and violence against the Soviet Union. This was their excuse for the purge. Sergei Kirov was a Communist Party leader of Leningrad. His murder was blamed on a plot concocted by a group of old guard communists. The group was tried in August 1936, found guilty, and promptly executed. Ironically, one of the last victims of the purges was N.I. Izyov, chief of the secret police and a major assassin. So these terror organizations, these secret police, the Black Ravens, they even turned on their own, and they went really wild with purges. In 1941, when Hitler attacked the Soviet Union, thousands of army officers and military experts had to be released from the prisons in order to work on behalf of the Soviet Union against a real enemy, Hitler. Well, this data represent victims purged only from the Communist Party in high military offices. Millions of other individuals were arrested, put on trial, tortured, imprisoned, and in many cases were executed. This is the terror. Gulags. The Gulags, a system of forced labor camps, were originally started by the Cheka in 1921. They were there from the very beginning. They were located primarily in Siberia in northern Russia. By 1934, now controlled by the Cheka's successor, then KVD, they held several million prisoners. Millions. Gulag prisoners built the White Sea-Baltic Canal and Moscow-Volga Canal, railroad lines, hydroelectric plants, and infrastructure that supported industrial development in the heart of the USSR. Gulag labor was worked in mines and forestry. Prisoners suffered harsh conditions, including inadequate food and shelter. The death rate was so high in gulags, you wouldn't want to go. You probably wouldn't make it. After the death of Stalin, the Gulag population diminished. However, camps did continue to exist all the way up to the 1980s. They would use prisoners to pretty much build everything. Okay. The author of this letter appealed to the Bolshevik Party to investigate conditions in Gulag camps and address them. So let's see what kind of abuses in the Gulag camps the author describes. It says, "We are prisoners who are returning from the Solovetsky concentration camp because of the poor health. We are returning as invalids, broken and crippled emotionally and physically. We are asking you to draw your attention to the arbitrary use of power and the violence that reign at the Solovetsky concentration camp in Kemi. If you complain or write anything, they will frame you for an attempted escape or for something else, and they will shoot you like a dog. They line up naked and barefoot at 22 degrees below zero and keep us outside for up to an hour." Wow. What kinds of abuses? Well, you can see here that the prisoners would be framed and shot like a dog if they complain. They were forced to stand in below freezing temperatures naked. This is torture. They were being tortured. All right, World War II. Germany's 1938 annexation of Austria and the Sudetenland increased Soviet concern about the possibility of future war with German aggression. Well, Germany does end up attacking the Soviet Union. The Hitler-Stalin Non-Aggression Pact, signed in August 1939, also known as the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, allowed Germany to invade West Poland while the Soviet Union could take East Poland and expand into Finland and the Baltics. In 1941, Hitler reneged on the pact and invaded the Soviet Union. So they had a peace treaty, and then Hitler turned on the Soviet Union and attacked it. The Soviet Union suffered horrific losses in World War II. Some estimate that it lost up to 25 million lives. However, from 1943 to 45, the Soviets gained strength and advanced west through Poland and Germany, occupying territory that would remain under the Soviet control until 1989. Germany surrendered May 1945. The Soviets won the war. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, US President Franklin Roosevelt, and the Soviet Premier Joseph Stalin. Well, they met at Yalta in 1945 to discuss the final stages of the war and to divide Germany, set up the post-war world, divide Germany. At this conference, Stalin negotiated masterfully and gained territory, power, and war reparations for the Soviet Union. The Soviet occupation zone in Germany would later become the Communist German Democratic Republic. War reparations paid for Germany to the Soviet Union would significantly delay the economic recovery of East Germany after the war and only marginally replace Soviet losses. Stalin would renege on his promise of free elections in Eastern Europe. He promised free elections, but instead he decided, I want it all, I'm going to keep it, and I don't care. In fact, I'm going to take everything they have and use it for myself. He would take all things of wealth from Germany and Poland and the Baltics and move them over into Mother Russia. So this was not a good relationship he had with Eastern Europe. He used the Eastern European countries to strengthen himself while he weakened them. After World War II, the Soviet Union established communist dictatorships in several Eastern European countries, while Yugoslavia and Albania established their own communist governments. Note the location of these Eastern European states that would fall within the Soviet sphere. They created a rim or buffer around the Soviet Union. Interestingly, Vienna, the city of Western or capitalist Europe, actually lies geographically east of the communist cities, Berlin and Prague. But it was neutral, so it was allowed to stay independent. The Iron Curtain speech. Let's read this. From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent. Well, behind that line lie all the capitals of the ancient states of Central and Eastern Europe. All these famous cities and the populations around them lie in what I must call the Soviet sphere. And all are subject in one form or another, not only to Soviet influence, but to a very high and increasing measure of control from Moscow. Well, the metaphor here of the Iron Curtain would persist for over 40 years after this speech. It reflected the veil of secrecy and lies that concealed Soviet life and life in Eastern Europe. It also reflected the restrictions on commerce and travel that confined the vast majority of people of Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union to stay in the Eastern Bloc, to never leave. You're now stuck behind the curtain. Stalin is the man in the gray suit at the center right. What are the other individuals in the picture doing? You can see they're all greeting him, they're applauding him, they're praising him. And so what message does this painting convey? Well, that Stalin is admired, that he's a hero, or at least that's what they want you to believe. Well, the children in this picture are wearing uniforms of their Soviet youth group. And what are they doing? Presenting Stalin with roses. And then we think about how Stalin appears. He looks very proud and well dressed, very composed and heroic. This is what they want people to believe. This is the kind of imagery they're putting out. They want you to think Stalin is a hero. And the children are admired and love Stalin. Oh, everyone loves Stalin. Look at the children. He's such a hero. This is the cult of personality. This is what they would brainwash people into believing. This is a hymn. A hymn is a song of praise or joy that typically celebrates or praises a deity, a god. Well, Stalin surely thought of himself as a god and made others worship him like a god. So what does this poem's title suggest about Stalin? Hymn to Stalin. If hymns are for gods, and this is a hymn to Stalin, well, then it suggests Stalin is the same as a god. So let's read this poem. O great Stalin, O leader of the peoples, thou who broughtest man to birth, thou who fructifies the earth, thou who restorest to centuries, thou who makest bloom the spring, thou who makest vibrate the musical chords, thou splendor of my spring, O thou sun reflected by millions of hearts. Well, what language in the poem further conveys this godlike status of Stalin? Well, thou is something you'd see in the Bible a lot. Thou, this, thou, that. Well, they're using biblical language here to talk about Stalin. And they're saying he makes the spring and he's the inspiration for the musical chords and he's the reason. He's the reason for all these things, just like God is the reason for all things. According to the poem, what were some of Stalin's achievements? Well, it claims he created man, right? Something God did. Making the earth fruitful, again, equating him to a god, bringing spring, and so on. All things a deity would do, a divine thing. They're trying to say, look how divine Stalin is. He is like God, or is God. Not even like one. I think he is one. You'll have a few more discussion questions today than typical, but you will be given more credit because of that. So we're looking at 6 comprehensive questions today. This lesson.